Greetings, hello, welcome, happy Sunday to everybody. Sorry about the brief delay, dealing with some technical issues here. I think because of those technical issues, I don't know if we're effectively broadcasting to YouTube right now. And if that's the case, we sincerely apologize. We'll figure those problems out. But welcome to those of you that are here and able to see this and participate. This is a very important topic that we have today, and we're going to continue to try to move forward and reach as many people as we possibly can. But thank you again for coming. Creating revolutionary families in a reactionary society, very important topic matter. And we hope you're able to achieve your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health today. And we also hope that you are definitely with us when we say that we stand in 100% solidarity with the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And we want to acknowledge the recent physical transition of the elder Clyde Belcourt, who of course was one of the co-founders of the American Indian movement, who made his physical transition just earlier this week. I myself, in the 1992 quincentennial 500-year commemoration of Cristobal Colon, or who they call Christopher Columbus, invasion of the Western Hemisphere, the American Indian movement organized 4 or 5 days of serious activities in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was able to humbly and honorably serve, along with some of the other All-African People's Revolutionary Party comrades, bodyguard for Clyde Belcourt and Dennis Banks, who's the other co-founder of the American Indian movement, who's made his physical transition a few years ago. So was honored to do that and give honor and respect to those elders, and also our African ancestors. Of course, we always give honor and respect to our African ancestors. And we just, a couple of days ago, a lot of people are honoring Paul Robeson, who was a great African thespian actor, as well as a communist and a committed activist for human rights, and never received any due or respect in this backward country. So we don't, anybody that America's honoring is somebody that we need to be worried of anyway. So the fact that they've never honored Paul Robeson, that should tell you that that's somebody that we should look deeper into. So we're honored to be here today. Thank you all for joining us, creating revolutionary families in a reactionary society. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Our Ancestors' Voices is one of many programs that we put out every week, sponsored by the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. And along with that, a definition, the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party based in Africa. And we see Africa as the national home of every person of African descent, scattered and suffering in 120 countries on earth, around the globe, speaking in several languages, practicing any number of spiritual forms of worship, but all part of the African family. And in our view, until Africa's free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And we define that as our objective, Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. We see our future tied specifically to the future of Africa. And we see Africa's future needing to be a unified continent that is governed under one government, a government that practices policies of scientific socialism. And we don't see us being able to progress as a people collectively until that happens. And you see on the right, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare from Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of the APRP. And of course, in that book, if you've read it, he talks about the need to unite revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground throughout the African continent. And in its little over 50-year existence, the AAPRP in its present form has been doing that work as called out by the handbook. And you see the logos of many of the sibling parties in Africa who accept the objective of Pan-Africanism as one unified socialist Africa. And our work is to unite with those parties to strengthen all of them so that we can build this one unified All-African Committee for Political Coordination, which in its actual existence would be the manifestation of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, the government that governs one unified socialist Africa that Nkrumah talks about in his book. And so our work to achieve Pan-Africanism, as I said, is outlined in that book. And Our Ancestors' Voices is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu Umi, and my daughter, Shakura Umi. Both of us are active organizers in the AAPRP. Shakura, along with many others who are participating right now, some of the new organizers in the party who I just want to encourage to embrace this party. This is your party. It is your party to build. You don't owe me or anybody else anything except to kick our behinds to be the best revolutionaries that we could be. And I encourage you to do that. And many of you are already doing that. And it is a wonderful contribution to honor our ancestors. So with that, we'll get started with our topic for today, revolutionary education for our youth and our families in a reactionary society. And I'll start it by turning it over to Shakura to get us underway.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Greetings, family. Hoping everyone is doing as best as they can to maneuver through the weekend. Maybe you're dealing with weather that is causing you to reevaluate. You know, you're going outside, or maybe you have some family issues, or maybe you're dealing with some personal things. So we thank you for joining us. We hope that you have thought more closely about joining an organization that works for justice, even if it is not the party, because we also understand that we need as many people to organize as possible, and we're not afraid for you to decide to go a different route with that. So however you are working through your personal things or family, or if you're trying to redecide what errands you're going to run, we hope that you'll still consider organizing as a part of that decision-making process, because being a part of an organization will allow you to foster some of the issues that you find with the current system and allow you to enhance your political education while also engaging with other people in conversations, discussions, and maybe even struggles around why the system is what it is and what are some techniques and mechanisms to deconstruct that. So with that, I'm super excited to talk today about our youth. This always continues to be such a topic that I just continue to foster, even when I think about other things that I am passionate about. You know, our youth are our future. Without them, we have nothing. We literally have nothing. And so we have to make sure that we give them as many tools as possible. It's our responsibility to understand that they are in the state that they are now because of us and what we have failed to either pass along to them, teach to them, what have you. So I want to start off by saying that when my mom was in graduate school, she shared with me that a professor told her a long time ago when she submitted a paper for a social work class, and her argument in the paper was that African women are the most oppressed beings in the world. And the professor responded back and said, you know, really good paper overall, you know, you earned a passing grade, but I don't think African women are the most oppressed. I think children are actually the most oppressed. And when my mom shared that with me, because we have dialogue conversations like this all the time, just as I do with my dad, I disagreed with that statement because I did feel like African women or African femme people are the most oppressed. And it took me a long time to really unpack that and to really think about that and to put my ego out of the side and just really start to think about, well, what are some of the advantages of being a child nowadays, right? Like, let's really think about that. How many adults take what youth have to say seriously? Does the youth's words hold weight? In the African culture, we dismiss them both when they make good choices, but also when they make poor choices. And usually what's the first thing we say to them? We explain to them, you know, until you start paying some bills, your voice and your opinion doesn't really matter. And I remembered hearing that growing up, and then I find myself saying that to people nowadays. So it's like, if we're already telling them you have no ground, you have no credibility, your words don't matter, that is in fact oppressing them in a sense. And so of course, I'm not saying that we don't need to discipline our youth. Of course, discipline has a space at the table, but how do we make our youth feel valued and respected while still helping them understand the importance of contribution? So if our youth are going out to get jobs and then contributing some of that money towards the maintenance of the household, well, then that becomes a different conversation. But if we are raising entitled youth to just be elitist and to have principles based on what we can give them, then yes, I think a different conversation about until you start paying bills can be had at that table, because at that point, now these youth are not understanding how their roles need to change as they evolve, and get older, so that the house can be maintained, but also really like, what's your contribution on a larger scale in the world? Not just the roof over our head, but how are you going to make a difference in this world when you transition and die? And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about that in the next slide. For the purpose of this slide, we have to just think about how capitalism is an ongoing, constant, intentional, and vicious element that is in our media streams. It is in the oxygen in the air that we breathe, inside and outside. It is what we think about when we go to sleep. It's what we think about when we wake up. It's what we think about when we're brushing our teeth. Every single moment that we have on this planet, capitalism is somewhere in that space, somewhere in the car, somewhere on the bicycle route that we take to get to work. It's a vicious system. And it represents itself as much as it can, wherever it can. So take each month, for example, 12 months in the year, we are exposed to some type of holiday where we need to go out and spend a bunch of money that some of us, personally speaking, do not even have to spend. So we're supposed to be able to spend money to celebrate each holiday. And capitalism hits the youth the hardest with that, because they're exposed to the holidays in a capitalist standpoint and the norms and the means when they go to their when they are with their families and their house. So the residents of setting up the Christmas tree, and then when they go to school, right, when they have classroom activities, when they go to the school assemblies, they're being exposed to this. The projects, the field trips where they have to go sing Christmas carols and things like that. That's all pushing propaganda through their tiny little esophaguses and teaching them that this is how you need to exist in this world. Make sure you spend money that you sometimes may not have, just to make sure you can, quote unquote, maintain appearances, and make sure that you can be the one saying, well, I did this and I did that. So we're also teaching them individualism, which is dangerous beyond measure, because they have the ability to be malleable and to grow. They're still developing their logic reasoning skills. They're still developing their emotions. They're still developing all of that. All of that is very delicate and malleable right now. And capitalism is already aware of that. We are behind. Capitalism is 17 yards ahead of us, and we need to catch up, because capitalism is already aware of that. Imperialism already saw foot of that, and they've already caught in on that. So because we're aware of that, capitalism knows that these poor babies are already feeling insecure. Their voices, their bodies, their brains, and their feelings are changing. They're constantly changing. And so the last thing they need to do is stick out and be different, unless we as their family, we as their community, we as their people, unless we foster a safe and reinforcing environment for them to embrace being different, to embrace being socialist in a capitalist world, to embrace being African in a world where people are telling you you are Black and African American. We are encouraging them and fostering a space for them to understand it's okay to be different, especially because we actually have the truth. And we know the truth. So we're enhancing their political education, because just like us as adults, we need the children to learn and to look to the past so that we can move for the future as well, right? And so that means we're also helping them to understand how to engage with other youth that are also increasing their political education. This would be an example of what I've referred to before, known as YPI, and the AAPRP, also known as the Young Pioneers Institute. So essentially, it's a tiny work study circle for youth, because we're learning about some of our ancestors in YPI. We're incorporating poems and songs and chats. We're marching, we're doing protests, we're coloring pictures of Marcus Garvey. We're coloring pictures of Kwame Nkrumah. We're learning the different countries in Africa. Some of the times we're coloring the continent of Africa and it's blank. And we have to write in the names of the countries. These are things that I remember doing when my parents would be in work study 2 or 3 doors down the hall at Sac State or San Jose State or whatever campus we were traveling to for that weekend. And I would be 2 doors back and we'd be coloring and learning about Marcus Garvey. We'd be coloring and learning about Elaine Brown and Assata Shakur. We'd be learning about these people and saying their names at the age of 4, 5, 6, 7. And we had different people rotating with work study. So people would come from work study to come into YPI and they would rotate and do turns. We had different people changing diapers. We had different people who were not afraid to feed other children somebody else's human milk. This is the kind of collective party that we have brought and that we will continue to be with, even in a virtual world in a pandemic. We are currently working on some strategies to try to re-implement that because our children need it. They need it now more than ever. And so allowing children to be with other children who are increasing their political education is the same line we're pushing for you. We want you to join an organization working for justice, and we encourage you to have your children join some type of group or organization or breakfast program or something where they can engage with other like-minded youth and enhance their political education just as much as us. And then we reinforce it as a family by having conversations about what they took away, what they learned that day while they were in the program, right? And so we think about how resisting is one way that we can refute capitalism. But if you do that, you're going to have a life of isolation. So we understand that we practice resisting by refusing to participate in school activities. And I'm sure my dad will talk in more detail about that. But that's one way that we can resist and not promote capitalism. We can also resist by wearing traditional African clothing, learning African languages and speaking them in public when you drop your children off, doing things like that. And then last but not least, if we have femme children, then we resist by making sure that we enhance their natural curls when we're doing their hair. We try really hard not to conform to European beauty standards, white supremacy, and put chemicals in these babies' hairs where they don't need all of that. Because again, we're resisting, we're not falling into line, we're pushing back as hard as we can against it, because that's our power. And that's all we have at this point. We have more, but we have to start with cultivating our power. The last thing I'll say is that as humans, we're biologically built to be social. We need to be around other human beings. We thrive off of that. And when we are around other human beings, it literally decreases our cortisol stress levels and increases our dopamine pleasure. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because our youth are faced at a crossroads. They either get to weigh the option of being committed to their principles, but then they don't have any friends or no social acceptance, or they decide to conform and fall in line with capitalism, and then they have friends, but they don't understand who they are, and they certainly don't understand where they're going or what their purpose is on this planet, which is a very deep conversation to kind of have. And it's truly a junction where we need to figure out how can we support them to move forward. Next slide, please. All right, so just to say this really quickly, you know, we have to remember that we have to teach our youth what we're expecting of them, which means we're demonstrating for them. So we're teaching them principles, and the commitment to principles is key. This is also where consistency comes in, and discipline. That's how they're going to survive in this world, believe it or not. That's the key right there, is their ability to have commitment to principles and to be disciplined and consistent. That is the strong skill that a lot of people don't have. And because of it, they're willing to flow and go with any direction that is blown their way, because they don't know how to think for themselves, and they certainly don't know how to stand on their own 2 feet and articulate what they want. They're so used to just being socially influenced by other people, so much that scholars have created a social influence theory, because they understand that some people will be willing to adopt the first idea that comes along because they didn't have to think about it. And they're just willing to go with the flow. And so, for example, I have godchildren, and I explained to all of them that I have a plant-based lifestyle. So I'm demonstrating for them my commitment to my principles. And so they are understanding that whenever they come around Godmommy Shukura likes plants. So we'll go to a restaurant and they'll say, there's a salad bar. And yes, that's right. There's plants over there. Yes, I can eat the plants. That's very good. That's very good. And so just being consistent with that. Because as I said, children and youth are malleable. Their brains are growing. And as we know, brains are a muscle. So we want to make sure that we use that as much as possible to help them be the best versions of themselves that they can be. Why? because we need them to be committed to their principles so that they can get comfortable doing it. The more comfortable they are doing it, the more they're going to be willing to put truth over false notions. That's going to also help build their discipline, which is going to build their confidence. And that's what they need in this world that is tearing them apart every single day, is confidence, the ability, the self-efficacy to know not only can Africa reach a socialist continent, but we are working actively towards it right now, and it will happen. That confidence, no one can take that from them. It becomes very easy. The more you practice being committed to your principles, the more you put truth over lies, it becomes very easy. Just think about any promoter of capitalism right now. Think about how much disgust you have for them. Take your pick, because it doesn't matter. Anybody who's promoting capitalism and finds himself in media, and you can name their name right now, if you have the, because every word that they say is contradicting to the previous word they just said. Now I want you to think about how much respect you have for somebody who is working as a Pan-Africanist or has worked as a Pan-Africanist. And although they may not have been perfect, they were much more consistent than the person you just thought of. That's the kind of legacy that we're trying to get people to build, because that's how we are going to evolve as a people. When we have more people who can commit to consistency and principle than we can those who are willing to be sold out. We're thinking about our comrade Carlotta, who fought against colonialism at home. We're thinking about our comrades Sekou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah. Those are the kind of people that we want to not only teach our youth about, but think about how we can work to be more like them, because they were unapologetically committed to their principles, and they didn't fall short at one point because they understood their leadership was what people were watching. So they had to maintain their credibility by being consistent, because they couldn't afford to lose the masses of people who were following them. So we think about them and we look at their footsteps and we move forward. And the last thing I'll say is, I want to ask you all, rhetorically, of course, who do you want to be in the eyes of the masses when you die? Like, do you think about those kind of things? Who do you want to be in the eyes of the masses when you die? What type of legacy do you want to leave? How do you want the world to be impacted when you transition? Will we be citing your name and your work in the future at our ancestors' voices? Will we be citing your work in the future ancestors' voices? When I have probably transitioned out and my dad may have transitioned out, will we be citing what you've done? Last but not least, what about the work that you're doing will make this world a better place and less capitalistic and imperialist? If that's the question I'm asking you, just think about those young eyes that are watching you every single day, because they're still going to be here after you and I have transitioned out and been long gone and turned to ashes in the ground. Lutua Continua, please, if you don't join an organization for yourself, join one for the youth, because they deserve better. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you very much. Excellent points. And I'm just going to try to build on everything that you just laid out there, Shukura. Now, the first thing is, so you decide that you want to have a family based around principles. What does that mean? That means that you're making the decision that you want the values, and by values, we mean the ideas that guide your behavior. You want those values and what those ideas are based on, right? What principles those ideas are based on. So for example, you say that people are more important than money. That's a principle, that's a value. So once you determine that it's a principle and a value, you can never compromise it. Like, you can't say that, yeah, that's what I believe, people are more important than money, and then go out and say, you know what, that person, I just saw them lose their wallet. They probably got all whatever limited financial resources they have available to them in there, but I'm gonna keep that. I'm gonna pick it up and keep it because I need to be able to buy this. Well, then you don't believe that people are more important than money. It's not a principle to you. So that's an example of what principles mean and what values mean. So you've decided you want to have a family based around revolutionary principles, meaning principles based on justice. And the minute you make that decision, as Shakur mentioned, you're now 100% opposed to everything happening in this backward capitalist society. I mean, no question about that. You're on the opposite side of this backward society. And if you don't want to be on the opposite side of this backward society, then that automatically means you don't want to live a life based on principles and justice, because nothing about this society is based on principles of justice. So the only way you could stand for principles of justice is to be opposed to this society, not opposed to some of the things that happen in this society, not opposed today, but for stuff tomorrow. You have to be 100% opposed to this society, because this society is 100% based on every value that is anti-human. And there's not a logical argument to refute that. So you've made this decision. You want to be in a family that has principles of justice. So one of the initial things you're going to have to do is develop healthy boundaries for your family and friends. And so what that means is you're going to have to make decisions that these things that represent truth and justice are cool, and these things that don't are not. And you're going to have to decide, as Shakur said, that you're willing to stand up to that, because your children and everybody else is going to be watching you to see how you respond, because they're going to base how they respond on how you respond. So for example, when you tell your children at the house, you know, we're Africans, we're not Americans, but then you send them to school and they're like, okay, children, we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And they see you standing there, and they know, because children instinctively love justice. So they know, this is not consistent with what I've learned. And you're standing there with your hand over your heart. Now you have done a great disservice, not to the principles of justice, but to yourself, to your credibility, to your child. That's what you're doing, because you can't dishonor the principles of justice. All you can do is dishonor yourself. So this is what you don't want to do. You don't want to be in that position. Whereas if you say, yeah, we're not going to compromise on that, we have a boundary, then your children will grow to respect that. And so for using, you know, our family, for example, Shakur's mom and I, we were, you know, we even after getting divorced, which we did when she was 4 years old, we still had unity on how we wanted her raised, and we still do to this day. We talk regularly about how to support our daughter. We will never stop. The only time that'll ever stop is when one or both of us are dead. So we decided, yeah, we're not going to compromise on the system, and we're not going to let this system turn us against each other. I remember one time we had a conference with one of Shakur's teachers, and the European woman, she's sitting up there talking about, well, the fact that you two have divorced, that may, you know, you have to realize that may contribute to her having some difficulty concentrating sometimes. And we both told her that's none of your damn business. You know, we're both here. So what are you talking about? You know, you probably been through 30 divorces. You know, let's talk about your teaching style, because based on your teaching style, we believe that you have some issues going on in your life that prevent you from being the best influence on our child. This woman broke into tears. We didn't care, because we were there to represent the integrity of what was happening, not only with our child, but every child in there. And so when they came into class, we had a standard letter that we wrote. Our child does not do your Pledge of Allegiance. This is not our country. We were kidnapped and brought here. We're trying to overthrow. We wrote that in the letter, and we gave it to them and told her, you have any questions, you let us go. Don't say anything to her. You talk to us about that. This is what you believe? I said, yeah. I said, this is what we believe. Just like you believe in saluting a country based on theft, murder, and injustice. That's what you believe. You should be focused on that. And so sometimes, usually they would honor it, but every once in a while, some of them wouldn't, and we would be right back on them, because that's a boundary, you all. That's a value. It's a principle. We're not going to ever compromise that. And they had to respect that. And again, this child on the other end of this program had to respect it. Not saying we were perfect, because I make more errors than any human being, but the effort and the sincerity in the effort could never be questioned. And so since Shakura saw this, when she grew up and she began to teach school herself as a what do you call it, a primary school teacher, she began on her own. Like, I didn't have to say, you know, don't have them commemorating that terrorist flag. I never had to say that to her when she was adult. She's the one that told the children, like, I don't do that. You know, I'll give you a couple of minutes to do whatever the hell you want to do, but I'm not doing that. And she did that because the value was consistent, as Shakur mentioned. And she understood it. It was explained. We discussed it. You know, while some families are sitting around talking about who wants to marry a millionaire, we were talking about our values that we wanted to have at all times in this backward society. We didn't sit around talking about NBA housewives. We didn't talk about none of that nonsense. We talked about what kind of values we wanted to have in our family and in the society. So it was never an issue having those values being practiced. And then you have to make sure everyone in your family and everybody you know is either hopefully comfortable with the values you adopt, but even if they're not comfortable with it, you have to ensure that they respect those values that you have. It doesn't matter whether they understand it. You give them full opportunity to understand it. And I'll give you an example. I know when we changed our names, you know, we didn't play around with that. I'm not passing judgment on anybody. You know, you do whatever you think is right. But for me, just me, Ajamu, it was important for me when I changed my name. I wanted to change it. I didn't want Shakura to see me when I was around my people. Yeah, my name is Ajamu. I got an African name. And then when I'm around the Europeans and capitalism, oh, my name is Slave Boy. You know, yeah, I'm Slave Boy. I didn't want her to see that. So I wanted her to see that the principles that I told her were important are important 24/7, 365 days a year, regardless of the consequences. And let me tell you, when I did that, when I changed my name, quote unquote, legally in the early 1980s, there were serious consequences. No question about that. But I didn't care because it was more important that the principles be respected. So my thing was, whenever people call my name, even at my job, they're going to have to deal with Africa. That was my concern. And it worked out like that. And I had conversations with the family. Her mom had conversations with the family. We devised strategies on how to interact with our family and friends. And so I told my parents, which was very difficult. None of this is supposed to be easy. We're fighting a battle for our dignity. That's never going to be easy. I had to tell my parents I was named after my father. I had to sit down with them. It was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever done in my life, and explain to them I was changing my name. And of course, they took it personal at first. But I knew we had already talked about this in terms of developing our strategy. And I knew, and we had talked to elders in the movement, and they had encouraged us that if we were consistent and we were humanistic, our African values, that over time, our parents would grow to respect and accept it. And that was the correct position. So in other words, I didn't have to say, well, you know, my slave name was Richard. So when my parents, of course, they're going to make mistakes. So when Richard, I didn't have to be, my name is Ajamu. I'm not no slave name. I didn't have to go through all that. And anytime you see somebody doing that, that's because they're not ready to deal with how to engage that process in a serious and principled way. You know, they're just reacting to emotions. So when my parents did that, I just told them, you know, Mom, Dad, I just want to remind you, you know, the discussion we had, like, I changed my name, and it's not a rejection of you. And I even to this day have my father's initial as his first name initial, because he was Richard. That's my middle initial today. And I explained that to him. I kept that out of respect for you. I'm not diminishing anything you've done. We're enhancing it with what we're doing. And I kept explaining that to them. And over time, it took 4 or 5 years, but they got it. They began to understand it. And by the time each of them passed on, they were 100% Ajamu, 100% Kilolo, Shakura's mom's name, and understanding and respecting if people didn't say Shakura's name right when my parents were looking after her, because we would travel home to Africa and leave her with my parents. When they were looking after her. If people didn't say her name right, they grew to the point where they would correct them and explain to them, no, this is an African name. It's Swahili. It means be grateful. That's our culture. They didn't even understand that fully, but they respected it because we were consistent with it. We were consistent with our values. And so that's what you have to do. You can't be all over the place. One thing one day, something else the other day. You're sending the wrong message to your children, your family. You're telling them they don't have to respect what you're doing. So you got to be consistent, and you got to ensure that the boundaries you establish, that you live by them and that you respect them, because if you do that, everybody else will too. And then you have to establish practices for the youth that offset this bourgeoisie system. And you have to do that in a practical sense, right? Like, you can't be foolish. You know, this capitalist propaganda around Christmas is serious. These people ain't playing with that. They're trying to get you to spend your rent money, your electricity bill money on some Christmas presents. So they are serious with their propaganda. And so we couldn't be fooled. I wasn't going to be foolish with that and be like, I could just ignore it, while everybody else in the world, other than Shakura's mom and I, are telling their kids, you're going to get all this presents and all this, you're going to come up with all this stuff, and we just ignore it. You're going to turn your children against you. You're going to see it like, well, you just don't want to allow me to have any fun. Everybody gets to have fun except me. So we devise strategies. We plan. And we said, so what we would do is give her presents throughout the year. Give her something around December 25th, but never on December 25th. And would explain to her why. You might have a better idea. There's all kind of, our creativity is here. We should use it. But the point is that we wanted to develop a process that defang this Christmas, December 25th merchant capitalist propaganda, so that we would never have to be forced to feel like we had to give in and celebrate that. And we never did. And it was very effective. And I think you can tell listening to her, it's not like she was, people, when she was a baby, people used to say, you're going to traumatize her. Yeah, you don't even know what trauma looks like, because your kids are traumatized right now. But you can listen to her and see her and tell that was not the case, because everything that happened, she was involved in and had an understanding. And again, we weren't perfect, and you're not going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be. It's not the objective to be perfect. The objective is to be, as Fidel Castro's told us, the qualification for leadership is sincerity. The objective is to be sincere, and you'll get better as you go. And you have to do that with strong communication skills and systems in your family that are constantly utilized and tested. You have to constantly talk to your people around you about your values. You have to talk to them about it. You can't just assume they understand. You have to talk to them about it. You have to be the propagandist that's helping people understand why you're living your life the way you do. They have to be able to understand that. So when I told people I don't drink, smoke, and everybody in my family was drinking and smoking, I don't use the N-word. Everybody in my family, including my 80-year-old grandmother, every other word was the N-word. I had to be consistent with that and explain to them, this is why I don't do that, because of post-traumatic slave syndrome, and how is us calling each other that helping us? Show me some examples of how we really improved and are doing well calling each other the N-word. How's that helped us advance as a people? And after a while of doing that, y'all know what happens. My family started, Ajamu says we shouldn't call each other the N-word. Ha 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 ha. And then it started out like that, but then after a while, it began to internalize itself with them, and they began to stop communicating like that. Ajamu's telling us we shouldn't be putting each other down all the time. Ajamu's telling us we should believe in they begin to do that. So you have to use your communication skills to ensure that your family and friends are practicing those kind of values, particularly around your children, because I didn't want my child growing up hearing all that nonsense. I didn't want that. And I can tell you right now, she didn't grow up hearing that. She didn't grow up hearing the N-word everywhere. And even if we were in public, and she can stop and correct me if I'm lying to you, and there were people I didn't know, and they were using it, I checked them. Excuse me, but You ain't talking like that around my child. You shouldn't want to talk like that around your child. And people respect that. The problem now is that nobody has the courage to stand up and raise the bar. People respect that. It's not just because I'm a big African man that think I was going to beat him up. That might have been part of it, but a bigger part of it was that people instinctively know justice. They knew it was correct. So people would always be like, okay, all right. And I continue to do that. I saw some youth earlier today when I was taking a walk. They were doing it. I'm like, why y'all do that? All right, OG, I respect that. Now, it was more of them. They could have jumped on me if they want, but it's because there's no more powerful weapon than the truth. So I hope you understand. I hope people don't leave that thing. Well, he's saying I need to interrupt people. Oh my goodness. That's not the point. The point is that live by your principles. Practice doing that. All right. And don't ever compromise them. You can't compromise them because the minute you compromise them, they no longer exist. And you got to understand that in order to ensure you don't compromise them, you've got to understand the difference between principles and strategies and tactics. They're two completely different things, because principles, again, are values that you never compromise. Strategies and tactics you change based on their effectiveness. So, for example, in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, our principles are that Africa is primary. The United States of America is not primary for us. And we don't mean that disrespecting the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. This is their home. And we have 100% respect for that. We mean that saying that we would never, none of us would ever claim priority for this country for our interests as African people over Africa. That's what that means when we say the primacy of Africa, that I'm working towards Africa's liberation. And it's not about, really, to me, is kind of irrelevant what happens here, because I know what happens in Africa will dictate what happens here. So that's a principle. I'm never going to compromise that, you all. That's not going to happen. A strategy and tactic is that in our party, our strategy is that we want to use political education to politicize our people to the realities that I just talked about, using the example of the primacy of Africa. That's our strategy. Our tactic is building work-study circles to be the vehicle for that political education to take place. Now, the strategy and tactics, political education, work-study circles, that might change. Who knows? That might change. But the principle will never change. And you have to understand the difference, because if you don't, you'll be confused. And some very intelligent people get confused on this question. Dr. Martin Luther King was confused about the difference between principles and strategies and tactics, because Dr. King, as honorable as he was, he thought that nonviolence was a principle. He thought that nonviolence was a principle, that you can never compromise nonviolence. And nonviolence can never be a principle when you're dealing with an immoral society. It can only ever be a tactic. When it works, you use it. When it doesn't work and someone's trying to use violence against you, you do your best to take them off the planet Earth. That's just your right as a human being. And you all know that's correct. So that means clearly from a scientific standpoint that nonviolence is a tactic. It's not a principle. A lot of us have let the capitalist system convince us that voting within the capitalist system is a principle. Well, if you don't vote, you're betraying our ancestors. That's the logic of our enemies and our slave masters. How is participating in a system that's controlled by our enemies our only option to get free? That's insanity talking. So clearly voting is a tactic, but we get confused about this. So it's very important, because if you don't understand the difference, then you'll be confused about this, and your behavior will represent confusion. And the people that are observing your behavior and trying to learn from your behavior, like your family, friends, your children, they'll be confused. So you have to know the difference. And you have to establish clear parameters with everyone, as I mentioned, what those principles are, why they're important, and why you won't compromise them, no matter what. You have to explain that. Like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I didn't sign up for selective service. So even though I was accepted to Bold Hall Law School, I was not able to go because I couldn't get any financial aid, and my parents didn't have any money. And nobody understood that. Everybody told me I was insane. All you gotta do is sign a piece of paper and you could go to law school. And I'm like, it's deeper than that. You don't understand. So I had to explain to people, not everybody, because I don't, a lot of these people are just haters. Yeah, shouldn't care what they think, but the people that mattered that I knew were genuinely concerned about me, but were just confused about why I took the action I took. Like my parents, I wanted them to understand. So I explained it to them. I explained it to my father when he was in the military. He was drafted to go to one of the initial shock troops to go to Vietnam, and he was totally opposed to it. And so when my older sister was born, he just left the camp. He was back in the U.S. He just left the Fort, whatever the one is, what is it, Fort Hood in Texas. That's where he was. He just left there to come back and be with my mom. And he got in trouble with the military. And so I used that. I told him, you know how you left the military when Felicia, my sister, was born? He's like, yeah. I was like, you did that. You didn't care what the consequences were because you had principles. He was like, that's right. I'm like, well, that's what I'm doing with this law school thing and this joining the military. You're the one that said, don't ever join, as he put it, this white man's military. So I said, so that's what I'm doing. And after I put it to him like that, he was like, you know what, son? I support it 100%. And I was never an issue with him again. And I had to work on my mom some more and some other people. But you have to spend that time doing that. You can't get mad at people because everybody here is propagandized 24/7, 365 days a year. And we're afraid. We live based on fear-based ideas. We don't know how to think things through. We have to help people learn how to do that. So you have to be patient with people and help people understand why you have the principles you have. And you have to establish strategies for responding when pressure is applied to adhere to this system. So I mentioned, like, Shakura, for example, not teaching in class and not, embracing her children doing the Pledge of Allegiance. So, these people are coming after us for this kind of stuff, right? That's happening right now. They're trying to wipe out actual history and replace it by making capitalism a wonderful system. And so that's going to require us to buck them. If you have children in school, if you're not bucking this system with all this going on, then you are a sellout slave who is doing nothing to serve the interests of your children. And if you're going to work and you're not speaking out against this stuff, you're not doing stuff, then you're a slave. You're just a slave. So you should just bend down and pull your pants down and bend over, because that's all you're doing. I'm sorry if you're insulted. You should be insulted by that. You shouldn't want to be that person. So you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Nothing in life worthwhile you can be completely comfortable and achieve it. That's not realistic. As Frederick Douglass said, progress concedes, power concedes nothing without a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand. So you have got to be willing to be uncomfortable. And the problem we have now is so many of us, we do so much to avoid being uncomfortable that we just aren't worth a damn to anybody or anything. And so you have got to be able to develop the ability to be uncomfortable and understand how to exist within that space. Because if you are uncomfortable and you're challenging stuff, that means you're doing the ancestors' work. Because the ancestors, again, are 100% opposed to this backward system. And if you're a person for justice, again, you should be 100% opposed to this backward system. And in order to do that, you can never be fully comfortable in this system. If you're fully comfortable here, if nothing is really uncomfortable, you avoid it, you don't really, then that's why you're part of the problem. So that's what you have to practice putting in place. And some healthy practices along these lines are learn how to establish healthy conversation, how to work through problems. Our problem in our families right now is that we have incest happening in our families, abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse. Nobody talks about it. Y'all know I'm telling the truth. Nobody talks about it. And if you bring it up, then you get gaslit. Well, we have got to, I'm not saying here that you have to, as an individual, figure out a way to solve that problem. What I'm saying is that we as a people, as justice-loving people, we have got to be figuring out ways to address those things. We will never move forward until we do. This model of ignoring stuff, acting like it'll go away on its own, it's clearly not working, y'all. It's not helping us. That model does not work. We have got to develop processes to challenge this stuff. Is it uncomfortable to do it? Absolutely. Is it 100% necessary? Absolutely. So we have got to be about trying to do that. And if we find ourselves avoiding conflict because we don't want to be uncomfortable, that is part of the problem. And our children see that and learn that. And that's why so many people my age, their children don't respect them, because they're like, you don't stand for anything. You know, it's like Dr. Martin Luther King said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And that's what our children see in a lot of these adults. And that's why they don't respect them. And they shouldn't. You don't deserve respect. They shouldn't respect that. And then there are examples, you know, establish your customs that buck the capitalist system. Like, in other words, establish rituals that you do in your family that are designed to challenge the system, right? Like, for Thanksgiving, like Shakur grew up, we go to the American Indian movements on Thanksgiving at Alcatraz. We get up at 2 a.m. and go. And so she understood as a child that that's what this day represents, honoring the indigenous people. She was never confused about that. It was never like, she's not like 34 now. I don't understand why them people was getting up like that. I'm sleeping so I could be I could be alert for the turkey and the cranberry. It was never an issue in our family. It was understood to the point where today she can explain it to people as well as I can. So you have to develop practices like that. We always had that. We have New Year's acclamations that we do. We have other things. You can, you know, you have creativity. She had a 16-year-old rites of passage ceremony when she turned 16. We always sought, her mother and I, our APRP community as a whole, to provide alternative avenues for our children to celebrate life that punched the capitalist system in the nose. And you all are probably more creative than we are. You can determine and develop even better ways to do that. It's very important to have that. And then look for others, you know, attempting to establish healthy revolutionary families and build with them. Now in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we have that. So we raised all of our kids as a community. Shakur can tell you, she was raised with several children that are adults now as a community. So we were raised with that. We kept each other's children. So we didn't have to worry about some reactionary babysitting service raising our kids, telling them to love capitalism and George Washington. We didn't have to worry about some pig's feet pastor talking to our children. We didn't have to worry about that. We knew we had trusted people who were around our children. And even if we just couldn't make that happen for one instance, our children were armed so that they could. I remember one time Shakur was a little child and somebody looked after her that wasn't a choice person, but, you know, trusted person with children, but just value-wise was reactionary. And when we came to pick up Shakur, they were like, we tried to play this game. I don't remember what the game was. We tried to play this game with her, but she said she can't play that game because it's reactionary. It's the enemy's game. And they were like saying this to me like there must have been some confusion. And I'm like, yeah, that is reactionary. It is the enemy's game. She's not going to play that. And you should be ashamed of yourself for playing that with your children. And I explained to them why. So, you know, do that. Establish that. People will respect it, you all, if you do that. They will respect you for doing that, because everybody knows this is a backward system. Everybody knows this system is corrupt. And when they see you making a sincere effort to challenge that, people respect that. Even if they're not doing it, they respect you doing it. And they'll learn from that. And that'll help inspire them to do it. And that's how we grow that to the point where these things that are backward and reactionary now and dominant no longer are going to be that way. And that's when we're on the pathway to immediate victory. So that's what we want. So to summarize, educating our families, it's all about principles. You don't have to be trained in bourgeois institutions to know how to educate your children. All you have to do is develop principles that are based on justice and develop processes in which you can implement those principles and be consistent with that and be willing to deal with the fallout of that and not waver in the midst of that. And you will see these values begin to take hold. And as always, we're always available to give more examples if people want to follow up and reach out to us. about how, we can do some of these things we're talking to you about. But we want to thank you for joining us today for this topic, very important topic. And we certainly want to invite you to come up and come out next week for our Ancestors Voices. It's going to be our 96th episode. And January 30th, we're going to be talking about Africa and identity confusion. We're going to be challenging these people who say that, quote unquote, Black people don't descend from Africa. It's 2022, and we still have to deal with that kind of nonsense because people don't study anything. What we do is, Kwame Ture said, is we react to stimuli, and we do that so consistently, we think that we're thinking. And so we constantly have to, as I've just got through talking about, challenge that with correct ideas. So join us next week when we talk about that. And please go to our store, AAPRP Forward Ever Shop, order something like you see in the picture, because we are a self-reliant organization and we need your donations to do, well, it's not even donation because you're getting quality clothes back as a result. So help us. And then you'll be able to not only help us build our revolutionary Pan-African work, but then you will step out the door and be fresh as a tack and be attracting attention and be like, where did you get those clothes? I want to be like you. So do that and go to the shop so you can do that. Go to aprp-intl.org, sign up to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. If you don't want to join the party because you think that you're a capitalist, then join some other organization working for our people. If you don't want to join any organization you see in existence, then start the I'm glad it's almost an hour and these clowns can stop talking organization. And if you do that, we know you're going to need a political education program and help in starting your I'm glad it's at the top of the hour and I'm glad these clowns have finished the organization. So we, even though you're against us, we will help you because, as Secretary said, bad organization is better than none at all. So start some organization working for justice. If you don't see one that fits you, go to abetterworld.me. That's where all of these videos, you can go back and look at them if you want other people to see them. So check that out, as well as other information is there. Coulddcommunist.org. I am on the editorial team. Please check it out. We have fresh articles out. This past Thursday, we come out every Thursday with new articles. Check that out. We have our bi-monthly Telegram event. It'll be 2 weeks from this past Thursday will be the next one. Download Telegram on your smartphone app store and do that. If I can do it, trust me, you can do it. It's very easy. And you will want to participate in that. We have a number of programs there at the bottom. Pantula, Revolutionary African Women, Forward Ever broadcast. Our comrades in New Mexico every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. They've been doing what they're doing there just as long, if not longer, than we've been doing this one, our Ancestors Voices. And the other ones have been going for quite some time now. Support all of them. They're all wonderful. They're all outstanding efforts to provide correct education. And please continue to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I'm working with groups all over the world, including right here where I live, and trying to help us get organized to raise the bar so that we can have capacity to fight back against our enemies and win. We appreciate each and every one of you. We look forward to seeing you next week. As Shakur said, join some organization working for justice. One unified socialist Africa is our objective, and we're going to achieve it. Whether you think we are or not is 100% irrelevant. We are going to achieve one unified socialist Africa. And the reason why is because we know patriarchy is evil and it's got to go. We know homophobia is evil, it's got to go. We know white supremacy is evil and it's got to go. And capitalism, of course, you know, it's got to go. Forward ever, backwards never. Everybody have a great rest of your Sunday evening.